All right. I am here with my good friend Lou Dangzalan, who is an immigration lawyer and practicing in Ontario. And we have got the video of all videos for you. This one is all about study permits, approvals, and drilled all the way down to the designated learning institution level. So, Lou, how are you doing? How is it in Ontario today?
Very foggy where I am at the moment. Very, very foggy. And as with weather conditions, people generally forget how to drive. So watch out, people. Just be very careful.
Fair enough. All right. So what I wanted to do, Lou, why don't you just tell people a little bit about yourself? Now I know that many people who are watching this today probably are very familiar with who you are. But why don't you give us a little bit of background on you? And this is your second foray into Immigration Nation. And we talked previously about DLIs as they relate to approval ratings from country by country. But tell us about yourself and how you got into this stuff.
Oh, for sure. Thanks for having me. Yes, second time. And thanks for having me back. I am a sociology major by training, and I did my master's in sociology and political science. So there's always been an underlying interest in looking at the big picture through data. And then I got into law school when I moved to Canada. That desire for understanding the bigger picture never really went away. So I've always been fascinated by stats, and what I've noticed is when I got into immigration, people had certain assumptions about, certain countries having a higher approval rating, for example, or other countries not having that big of a, chance for getting your file turned around. So I was looking for the data sets and couldn't find them anywhere. So I decided to start A-tipping, and boy, oh boy, I requested a lot. I think I may have gone crazy that night. And in the span of, let's say, in the last 3 years, I've received like constant streams of like data sets from immigration, including uh, per country breakdown since 2007. And the last time I was here, I did the analysis of because it's longitudinal data, right? So I was able to do something from 2007 to 2019, and we were able to establish that there's a positive relationship between the GDP per capita of a particular country with its approval rate. Of course, it's not correlational, meaning I'm sorry, it's not causal, meaning it doesn't cause it, but it's an interesting relationship nonetheless. So while I was doing that, I also received this more than 1,000 page document that included approval and refusal rates from different countries, but this time it was broken down by DLI. Been sitting in it for maybe over a year now, mainly because it's very hard to convert uh, data from immigration when they're disclosed, right? And I think it's actually point number one in my next slide.
Yep.
But yeah, all that to say is that we had to convert the data from PDF into a workable spreadsheet, and then the fun begins. You start the analysis essentially.
You bet. Let's flash up the Excel just for a quick second so people can see what we're dealing with, and then we'll dive into the meat and bones here. So you can see, you guys, we're not going to dive into this, at a super deep level, but there is a lot of work that's been put into building this, and so yeah, this is awesome, and this is a delicate topic, isn't it, Lou? Because
Very
ultimately
delicate.
people are looking for every advantage they can get to succeed with their study permit applications. They want to know if they're stepping in into some areas with landmines, and there's always been this impression that, that certain schools have a greater chance of, if you're accepted to those schools, of getting your study permit than others. And we'll get into all of that. But one of the things I think right off the bat for Lou and I, we're going to make a big caveat here. And that caveat is that these statistics are just that. There are so many factors at play that result in the statistics that we're looking at, that they are not to be taken as any kind of a reflection on any particular school that maybe we're showing as an example. And I'm actually going to pull in Lethbridge College, which is the city where I live, which I went to. I played volleyball as a captain on the men's volleyball team at the college, and I had wonderful experiences there. It's a phenomenal school, but you'll see how hard it is to get your study permit approved, even in the best of circumstances. So take the statistics with a little bit of a grain of salt, but also pay attention to them because there's a lot that can be learned from it. Now, before we jump in, that was a little teaser, a little intro to those who are watching this. I wanted to shift gears and just briefly, Lou, just give people a little bit more background and more information on you. So this is in the links in the description. We'll provide the connection for all of these different resource points that Lou's going to be talking about here. But this is Lou's website. You can go here. There is, you can book a consultation through this link here. If you have questions or you're looking for a free assessment, Lou's got this on his website. And then, if you do want more information about what we're talking about today, this isn't something that's going to be released to the general public. And so if you do have questions, there's an inquiry form that you can reach out, and it's subject to, discretion. And so it won't be just released generally to the public. I also want to give everybody a shout out and a heads up right at the beginning that Lou's got an amazing blog here on the site that talks about the statistics and the common reasons for refusal, which we're going to talk about today. And then highlight, which we'll do at the end as well, is Lou's got a study permit DIY boot camp that you guys are going to want to check out. And I think if there's any course that you could take on study permits right now, this would be the one to do. So definitely go in there and check it out. We'll have links in the description below. And then last but not least, Lou, there are only 361 subscribers on this In Light of All Circumstances podcast/video cast. And you guys need to get your keisters over there and subscribe. As you can see, I am subscribed. This is unbelievable content, and the things that these guys are doing, him and Will, and the special guests that they bring on right now, this whole Chinook system is a major content producer here for the site. But this is just, these guys are the up and comers that are totally, they're going to be outstripping me very, very soon here. So if you're not subscribed to this channel, you better get over there and do that. Okay, so there you go. That's how we roll here, Lou. So shall we jump into the slides and take a look? How's that sound?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sounds fun. Let's do it.
All right. So here we are. Now, I guess one of the things that I want to touch on, as we get started here, I guess the first thing is, why are these stats so important? Like, what's the big deal with this stuff?
I kind of hinted on it at the beginning. I said that I was always interested in data and the big picture. You're right. You always have to take these numbers with a grain of salt when trying to assess your own chances, only because it doesn't give you what your actual outcome would be, but it does give you an indication of what the big picture is. It's sort of like getting a roadmap, a bird's eye view of like what you're getting yourself into. And I think I mentioned this earlier at the beginning that when you do an ATIP request with the government of Canada, they do dump a lot of information on you. You're lucky if it's a readable PDF. Sometimes they might even just mail a copy to you, and it might not be OCR'd, and you have to do it yourself. And the challenge with statistical tables is that sometimes they don't actually get captured very well by optical scanners on whatever software is out there, for example. So it took us a while to actually translate this almost 2,000-page behemoth into an Excel sheet. It's now available for us, and what we do with it is basically we can pivot by DLI or by country. And I also, saw an ATIP disclosure about the most common reasons for, refusals for study permits, and kind of cross-referenced it with certain DLIs in their top source countries. So we're going to get into that today. So that's the problem with raw data, Mark. I'm not sure what your experience is with ATIPs.
Hit and miss, my friend. Hit and miss. When you're dodging everything that's redacted, I'm surprised they didn't just redact the whole page before they gave it to you. The reality is that's what they consider to be undisclosable. It's a definite moving target. And so, yeah, definitely hit and miss.
Yeah, so that's another level of difficulty when asking for information from the government. It's the transparency. But more to the point today, what is the implication of having access to information like this for clients, for example? And from the perspective of us practitioners, for example, if you're an immigration lawyer or consultant, what is it like to be able to give advice if you have access to the big picture? And if you'll just move on to the next slide, Mark. What we're doing today essentially is we're going to highlight a few DLIs that we pre-selected, and this is a very subjective list, guys. We tried to be pan-Canadian, but we also tried to be very representative of the big ones. Essentially, we have two universities, and we all know that the bulk of applications these days for study permits for international students, obviously, would be for colleges.
I had
So
to pull
we
this up.
pre-selected the following. Go
I
ahead.
had to pull this up. Okay. Let me just adjust this a little bit here. It's kind of going over, but this is one of the questions. May I know the rate for Algonquin College, please? and
Yep.
so unfortunately, Algonquin didn't make our list. It was close. Assiniboine Community College was there. So we're not going to go through and be able to respond for those of you who are looking for the approval ratings. We're not going to be able to address that in the video, but I just wanted to tackle that head on. But the reality is we do have the data. And so Lou is the gatekeeper of this. He's put all this together. So like I said before, if you do have questions, I recommend you book a consult with Lou, and then he can actually help you work through this stuff. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so if we have time later, maybe we can, pull it out. Let's
Okay,
see.
okay,
There
there
is
you
quite a
go.
big
See,
list right now.
there you go. This is dedication. So we may just be able to do that for you, Vu. So hang in there.
All right, so let's move on. So maybe we can accommodate it. So we're going for two universities: the University of Waterloo, Toronto, and then Centennial College, New Brunswick Community College, Lethbridge, Assiniboine, and Niagara. Some of the
Mhm.
bigger colleges from across Canada. And I'm just going to fly over the next few slides. But what I really want to impress upon everyone is where these DLIs are essentially sourcing most of their applications. And if you look at the horizontal axis, you'll see the raw number here,
Mhm.
0 to let's say 3,500 applications coming in from China, with not even a close second from India. Then
Yeah,
going on to the next slide with the University of Toronto, for example, you'll see that the applications are over 5,000, but that gap really increases
yeah,
substantially.
massive.
It's like threefold essentially for China versus India. Now, pay close attention to those top two countries. As the next few slides, you'll see that when we start looking at the colleges, you'll see that the top source becomes India, and then China drops from the list. At
Yeah,
Centennial College, we're seeing them at number 5. Their close second, the Philippines, is not even close.
yeah,
So, yeah, uh, take it for what it means, but
yeah,
basically, we're looking at the range of 2017 to 2020 during the pandemic here. We're going to break it down a little further, but if you can move on to the next few slides, Mark, you'll see that you have New Brunswick, same phenomenon. You'll see India at the top, and then a bit of diversity there, like
yeah.
you'll have Nigeria, Cameroon, Brazil, and then you're looking at the Assiniboine and Lethbridge, for example,
Mhm.
it's still India. So,
Yeah.
what's the feel like over the ground over there at Lethbridge, Mark?
Yeah. It's interesting, like when I think about Lethbridge, because this is obviously I went to the college there before I went to the university to complete my teaching degree. And I remember for years, Kenya was a really important source country because we had a lot of young Kenyan runners that came and joined the track team. And so then the college got on the radar of many communities in Kenya as a place to apply to. And like any of the study permit processes, like I said, India, if it's not at the top, it's near the top for, the vast majority of schools. And when we look and as we dive in a little bit deeper, as we talk about, okay, well, what does this mean? Why are there so many people applying for study permits? And that intersection between express entry and the study permits, we know that
Mhm.
almost 35% of all express entry PR landings are from India, which is to a large extent reflective of what we're seeing here on the study permit side. So there's some definite correlations there.
We talked about off camera, CRS arms race, so
Yeah,
to
we
speak.
did.
You try to maximize all the possible points that you can get, essentially. And as the government tweaks the program over the next few years, as the government adjusts our immigration program, it'll be interesting how it would impact express entry and down the pipeline study permits as well. So I'd like to move on to the next set of slides, if you don't mind. I think it's the next one after this one.
You bet. And
So
you can see,
you'll
I'll
see.
just flip
Mhm.
back. Just give me 1 second, Lou. I just want to
Sure.
reiterate the difference because some people may not understand. So first two are universities. These are like,
Mm,
4-year, whatever degree granting institutions, public institutions. University of Toronto is the same way. And then the colleges are traditionally, yes, you do have some, degree granting colleges to some extent, but generally speaking, these 1 or 2 year programs for the most part. And so that's the difference between the university and college. And these are all community colleges to a large extent. I don't know, are any of these private? I can't remember if any are private, if they're all public colleges. Do you
I
do you
believe
remember?
we pre-selected public ones
Yeah, we
for
chose
for
public
all of
for a
them.
reason. I'll tell you why, because I didn't
Mm.
want to get sued by any private colleges
That's
that
a whole different story right
accused us
there.
of sharing data that was harmful to them. And there's some amazing, awesome private colleges out there, and there's some whose approval ratings are not as high, but we're not going to talk about them.
Mm, mhm.
Okay, so here we go.
So speaking of approval rate but broken down by DLIs, that's an excellent transition, I gotta say. First thing I want to say is that if you look at the bar and the graph right there and on the screen, we're looking at years 2017 to 2020. Let's start off with the University of Waterloo. So that horizontal line, that's the global average. So remember, if you remember, Mark, I was here last time. We also
Hmm.
talked about
Yep.
statistics for study permit approvals by country alone. So
Yep.
that's the aggregate. So that line's going to keep constant for the next few slides, but look at the blue bars for each year for each university. And on the left side, you'll see pre-pandemic average at 88% for the University of Waterloo. And then during the pandemic, they really suffered. I think it's not just the University of Waterloo, it's generally across the board, but the average overall from 2017 to 2020 for the University of Waterloo is 69%.
Yep.
Pre-pandemic at 88%, that's a very respectable number.
Yep.
And then moving on to the next slide would be the University of Toronto, where you see very similar numbers. In fact, they have the same pandemic average at 12% for the year 2020. And then the pre-pandemic is at 84, with their global average from 17 to 2020 at 66%. Um, One thing I would like to note before moving on to the next slide is
Hmm.
you'll notice that the global average for approval rates generally follows the contour of the approval rate for each DLI. There are
Hmm.
certain exceptions though, and we'll talk about them as we go along.
Yep.
So next, I believe, is the Centennial College, which is also very interesting because it doesn't necessarily follow that particular graph. And I think if I'm reading their stats correctly, if I remember the raw data coming out of Centennial, they ramped up their international recruitment at some point.
Yep.
That's why their numbers are actually going up and down. So that may have had an impact on their approval rates as well. But as you can see, and as you'll see in the next few slides as well, colleges generally perform lower than universities, at least in this selection of DLIs that we did. So you'll see the pre-pandemic average for Centennial at 52, the pandemic average at 21%, which interestingly was higher than the University of Toronto and the University of Waterloo. Then you have the global average, sorry, the 2017 to 2020 average at 44%. And next, I believe, is New Brunswick Community College,
Yep.
which follows the general trend lines: 39%, 13%, and then an average of 33%. Obviously, you'll take that with a grain of salt
Yeah.
because 2020 was a very, very nasty year for all DLIs. Then next is your alma mater, Lethbridge.
Yes, indeed.
So you'll see 45% for
Yep.
pre-pandemic, pandemic average of 12, and then the average of 37 for those 4 years.
Yeah. And you
Um,
think about it, that's
mhm,
12% approval rate. So pandemic average, 12%. And, of everybody that submits an application to study at Lethbridge College, 12% were approved. And
mhm.
if you don't mind me just jumping back again. So then the next
Yes,
question to ask is, and I don't want to kill your thunder, but I look at this and okay, what does that mean? So does it, what is playing into that? Is it because the IRCC doesn't think Lethbridge College is a reputable institution? Well, I don't think that's the case. This is a well-respected, community college here in Lethbridge that, like I said, I went to it, my son went to it, and it was a perfect transition to university. But if you go back, and
mhm,
I think we've got that here, right? You look at the source
right there.
countries, and once again, we've got India and Kenya leading the way. Nigeria is in there. So there's a heavy African influence. And from our previous video that we did, the Immigration Nation on the approval ratings by country, well, can you remind people what Africa is like for study permit approvals
Mm.
across the board?
It's not very good, especially
No.
sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
We're seeing approval rates going down even to the single digits, in fact.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's pretty alarming. And
Yep.
if you'll remember, Mark, we did talk about this in other venues, including the House of Commons. They
Hmm.
dedicated 5 sessions on this.
On this
I think
topic.
it's alarming enough to see the outcomes, the differentialities in outcomes is very important. And I'd like to point out as well, when we're talking about Lethbridge, and you're right to bring up the previous slide on Lethbridge, because if you look at the book, the raw number for it, we're looking at over 1,000 applications. So
Yep.
it's not a weird statistical anomaly. It's just, they do have the numbers to actually justify those averages. Anyway, moving on after Lethbridge, we have, I believe, Assiniboine
Yep.
and Niagara College. And again, it follows the trend line, except for 2017 for Assiniboine. I'm not familiar with what's going on.
Yep.
These DLIs, happy to talk to you guys. Like, my email's open. That form is there for a reason. I want to talk to
Hmm.
you and let's find out what's going on.
Yep.
Because I think in the following slides, after Niagara College, and Niagara's also like following the trend line.
Hmm.
So moving on to the top reasons for refusal by countries. Now, this is very interesting. So what I did was I collated 7 countries that were generally, hanging
Yep.
around the top 5
Yep.
of
The
those
high ones.
top source countries for those specific DLIs. And I was able to obtain data um, about the common refusal grounds used by immigration when people refuse the study permit. And you can see that the winning reason for this would be R2161B purpose. So I guess
Yep.
let's start to break that down, Mark. But before we do, I'd like to say that basically, um, folks are refused on the basis of regulatory provisions or even the statute. But all that to say is that they're not the reasons, and this is a common misconception. When people get refused, they think that the refusal letter actually contains the reasons. No, it does give you an indication as to why you were refused, but the reasons you have to order them by way of an ATIP to get your GCMS notes. If you're challenging this at a federal court, you can wait for the reasons to be divulged by way of Rule 9, according to the rules of the Federal Court of Canada. But in any event, I'd like to know, Mark, do you have any thoughts about 260? I'm pretty sure you've encountered this in the
Yeah.
past.
So you think about this, when all you see on a sheet of paper is, well, your stated purpose of study isn't consistent with blah, 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 whatever they say. And it's really, really challenging, at least now, as we look at globally how this has evolved. You know, we haven't drilled down into the demographics really of people. this is this is the grounds for refusal as established under the legislation. We haven't really dived deep into, you know, individuals' human capital factors and things like that. But the
Mhm.
purpose, and when you look at the purpose of study, it transcends so many different aspects of an applicant's life. They can use it as a refusal ground for just about anything. They can say, well, there's a big gap in, when you completed your last studies and when you want to study now. Therefore, I don't feel like the purpose of your study is genuine. Or, well, you studied, or your work experience was as whatever, a cook, and now you're applying to be an interior designer and you're going to school in Canada. Therefore, I don't feel your purpose is that it's genuine. And so this one is like the massive catch-all, aside from
Mhm.
ties to your home country. But this is one it does not surprise me in any way, shape, or form that it is number one on the refusal grounds. It's like Chinook, it's like a default button that's already checked off, right? On Chinook, I'm just being a little facetious. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's like the default ground that you have to uncheck if it's not the reason for refusal, when it's setting up for the officers within Chinook. And you have to watch the video I did with Will Tao on the update on Chinook a few months back. So that's my thoughts on this, Lou.
Okay, yeah, no, absolutely. As we see more automation in decision-making process, and as more and more technological tools are provided, officers we'll see a sort of convergence of reasons, but at the same time, in parallel, we'll see a set of more sophisticated reasons that are released. We're starting to see this, in fact, when we're getting the reasons for refusals for study permit applications. But you're absolutely right. 216(1)(b is the catch-all when we're talking about purpose, whether it's because you're changing careers, or whether because you have a large gap in your studies, or you're pursuing a program of study that's completely different from what you've done in the past. I mean, that's the whole point of the study plan, or the statement of purpose, or the explanation letter. Choose your, nomenclature there.
Yes.
Um,
Critical.
at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you would have to explain to the officer and satisfy them that your program of study, your choices in life are coherent and that they make
Mhm.
logical
Makes
sense.
sense.
The challenge, however, is how do you fit that in, let's say, 2, 3 pages? In fact, I spoke to an immigration officer, and another one, a former immigration officer, and they're saying, like, keep it to 1 page, quite frankly. Um, and the plethora of study plans that I've seen, and even those that we help our clients to submit, it's usually around 2 or 3 pages because
At
it's hard
least.
to explain.
Yeah.
Right, right.
And that's being
But at the same
concise.
time,
Yeah.
that's right. Absolutely. That's already very concise. And on top of it, officers typically are expected to turn around a decision in an application. And I believe my colleague Andrew Colton had this
I've
in of his ATIP adventures: 6 minutes.
6. I was off.
You're off by one, but you're
It
you're pretty close. But essentially, they have all these tools, like, right, including Chinook and including advanced analytics, which is now rolled out completely across temporary resident programs, especially in the global south. So, what are the implications? That means that your applications for study permits need to be smarter. If you
yeah.
do not fall in, let's say, the logical progression group,
Yeah.
this is what I like to call them: the people who are, like, let's say, fresh out of high school, who want to
Mhm.
pursue post-secondary education. And I think it's worth bringing about Stephen Murren's tweet. I think it was sometime late last year, when he was able to pin down some statistics as well. It turns out, top of my mind, because a lot of my clients come from the Philippines. Surprise, surprise, I'm Filipino. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so a lot of folks from the Philippines who are in the age cohort of 20 to 25, they have a 78% approval rate.
Approval. Yep.
Yeah, and then you move it up to 26 to 30, you're seeing about 70%. And then after 30, drops down to 49. It's a crash.
Yeah.
It's an incredible crash. And you see that pattern repeated across different countries, especially those that are visa required. And a lot of the reasons really fall down on, or basis rather, falls down on these reasons that you see before you. So the other one that I'd like to point out would be assets and
Yeah.
family ties.
Yeah.
They're also mentioned there. I think you hinted on this, Mark, earlier. Ties. What do you
Mhm.
usually put for these
Yeah.
things?
Yeah. This is why it is so important for people to realize that when you're retaining someone to help you with your applications, it is a massive undertaking for that representative to dive into your personal life and pull out all of the details, every possible aspect of your world, to make these connections to justify why you're going to return back home. And it's so
Mhm.
interesting with ties because when you talk about the purpose as well, and they kind of intertwine a little bit, you've got a situation where you're not proving that, hey, this is a fantastic school, I love it, and I'm going to transition to permanent residence. Like, you are not touching that with a 10-foot pole. You're showing how this school is so amazing, nothing compares to it in my home country. And when I get this education, I'm going to have this phenomenal job waiting for me back home. And in some cases, Lou, I've got a company who says, yeah, we'll actually hire them if they complete this education. And that goes in too. And so, and then the twisted part of ties is, oh, you've got family in Canada. Oh, that's a negative. You may want to stay. And then, oh,
Mhm.
you've got family back home. Okay, well, yeah, that might be an indicator, but it's not conclusive that you're going to go home just because you have family. Like, it's a total double
Mhm.
standard. And then people are in this same situation that express entry forces them, where do I leave my spouse and kids behind if I do have family? Because my chances are theoretically better that my study permit's going to get approved. So it's the separation of family. It's the same thing for express entry. My CRS scores, human capital, is really good. But if I add my spouse in, whose language and education isn't as good as mine, I can kiss 30 points gone and I'm never immigrating to Canada.
Mm.
So then I'm forced to list my spouse as non-accompanying, be separated from him or her for, 3 years, and then finally be reunited in Canada. So, okay, that's my views on ties.
Right. I mean, it really encapsulates the this feeling about study permit applications and TR applications writ large. Mark, in my opinion, it feels more like science and that we're oracles and seers, versus, let's say, for example, if it's an express entry application under the a federal skilled worker, where it's almost like it's a science. Like, if you hit those factors, you get X number of points and you get in, right? Um, so it's understandable why a lot of applicants and representatives, both lawyers and consultants, are banging their head. I remember
Yeah.
in 2018, I went to the CBA no, 2019, the CBA conference, the last one that was in person,
Yeah.
in Winnipeg, and I believe I was speaking to Cindy Switzer, and
Yep.
she asked me, "So, what's the bulk of your TR applications?" And I said, "Study permits." And I think there was almost a repulsion, in
Yeah.
a
Like,
sense that,
oh,
oh my
you're in that
goodness.
industry.
Yeah, yeah, and it's wow, like, that's a roller coaster. I want, less emotions. It's better for my mental health, and, you
Yes.
really gotta like what you're doing in terms of,
Yeah.
like, study permits in order to understand it. And going back to this table, though, so the ties, we know that it's more art, but it's a question of, like, balancing off, right? Because when
Yeah.
you talked about family, if you do have family in Canada, that's certainly an advantage if you're doing PR, whether you're doing express entry or various PNPs. But if you're applying for TR, like study permits, it could hurt you.
Yeah.
So in my practice, what we typically do is we try to counter it by another counterweight, essentially.
Yeah.
And you assist the officer in a way that, okay, I have family in Canada, but I also have family in India, for
Yes.
example. And my ties to my family in India are far stronger because I'm doing this, this, and that for them,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
example. So those are typically some of the strategies, but the art comes to the point of advocacy. When you are basically advocating for your client, you need to make sure that the officer catches that in the first 3 seconds that they're looking at your submissions.
Yeah. And I guess one thing I will add, if your representative is not taking the time to directly communicate with you, I'm not talking about a middle person, I'm talking about your representative, then I
Mhm.
would run the other way as fast as you can, because ultimately it's that intimate relationship between you and your client that's going to allow you to dig out the information necessary to really put forward an application that gives you the best chance of success. And unless you have those
Right.
discussions and you're talking about who you are, where you lived, what your family is, what your interests are, why you're going to school, why you chose this school, why this program, all of these things. Like, it's really, really hard to do that in a simple form that you fill out and hand to the representative. So I don't know about
Mhm.
your experiences, Lou, but yeah, the most critical aspect is that initial sit down to brainstorm. And that's really what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with that. You as a client need to be able to talk to your representative, whether it's a lawyer, a consultant, or their team, especially. We try to work in a collaborative setup in a sense that, it's not just us doing
Mhm.
your application for you. I
Yeah.
think that model of business of doing law is a bit passe, and I think there's a sense of empowerment as well that we give back to our clients, or rather that we encourage in
Yeah.
it from our clients to actually take charge of their file, and
Yes.
we're there to guide them from the legal standpoint. But going back to ties, Mark, there's one
Yeah.
thing that I really think that we should mention, and I think it's come up in some of your episodes as well. TR applicants coming in from, let's say, third countries where they're also temporary residents there. I'm thinking specifically of the Middle East, for
Dubai.
example. Right,
Yeah.
right, Dubai. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you mitigate those ties? I mean, as you can see from this large table here, assets and
Yep.
ties are certainly at
Number two.
play. And if you're
Yep.
citizens of these countries and you're
Yep.
living in Dubai, for example, where you're not a permanent resident,
Yep.
how do you justify
Yep.
that
It be
you're coming back, right?
Yeah, it becomes really, really tough. So one of the ways, obviously, is if the person is, say, a spouse, and their husband or wife is remaining in Dubai and working. Well, obviously, a lot of status for foreign nationals, well, by and large, the majority of it is all tied to employment. And so if
That's
you
right.
were uprooting and leaving Dubai and you haven't been back to the Philippines or Pakistan for 20 years, you're going to have some trouble. And so
Hmm.
what are the ways that you can try to mitigate that? Well, one is to show that, one, you have an ability to return, and that even if it isn't going back to your home country, but that all your connections and ties are still pulling you back there, like a job offer
Hmm.
that's waiting for your return, which will resecure the status that you had. Maybe you are leaving a spouse behind who's working, you're the dependent on that principal, spouse's status in the UAE or wherever it may be, and that going for 2 years and then coming back, you have full ability to return. But even then, Lou, it's not easy, and it's
No.
definitely one of those factors that kind of starts to weigh down. Can't really show my hand here, but weigh down the no side of the equation.
That's right. One other thing that I'd also like to emphasize, because if you're working in the Middle East and you're working, let's say, a good job, you probably have a lot of disposable income that allows you to travel to, say, for example, visa required countries, especially the Migration Five or the Five Eyes
Mhm.
countries, for example. If you have travel history, very substantive travel history, I think you should be leveraging that
Yeah.
if you're coming in from the Middle East, because while it's not a direct counterbalance to the lack of ties, it does emphasize a positive pattern of, let's say,
Yep.
compliance with immigration rules
Mhm.
around the world. And that
Correct.
generally can work if,
Yep.
in the big picture, it works in your favor if there's a lot of it. However, I will say, and I always say this, according to the Federal Court of Canada in Doncor, that the lack of travel history should not be a factor in the adjudication, that should not result into a negative decision on a temporary residence application. But if you look at this table, Mark, you see
Yeah.
travel history.
Oh yeah. Well, you look at it, like, in all honesty, family ties.
Mhm.
What else do we have on that list? Um,
Current
Current
employment.
employment, right?
Yeah.
None of those factors in and of themselves as an isolated ground should be sufficient to, well, should result in a refusal purely on that basis.
Mm.
And so, but that's why there's one, two, three, four, five top ones, and you could get a refusal that touches on all of them.
Mhm.
They just check it off, check, 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 check. And we won't even get into the errors in those
Right.
refusals, which,
Right.
there's some
Right.
indication that, Chinook produces almost a 25% error rate in the refusal. whether or not that's actually substantive or whether it's more anecdotal. But we've clearly seen refusals that are not based on the actual facts of the application that was submitted. So,
Oh yeah, I've seen it a couple of times for employment. Someone who is has been always gainfully employed in their entire life saying, "Oh, you're unemployed. We're
yeah,
refusing you."
it's just wrong.
Do you remember back in the days when an officer at a visa office would actually have like this 5-page checklist, and if you're refused, they literally just
Oh,
check
yeah.
off
Check.
what's on the list.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, because I'm not sure if I shared this in your show a while back, but the only country to have ever refused me a visa was this one, Canada.
Oh, that is
This
so
was
awesome.
this
That
was
is
in
so awesome.
2009.
Oh,
And it really boils down to ties because I was living in Singapore as an international student there, and, I had a US visa, haven't used it at that point, and I was gonna make a beeline to Niagara because I was going to New York and to, DC doing my research, and then I got refused, and really the reason is dual intent because I had a pending PR application at the time,
mhm.
but, at the end of the day, that allowed me a glimpse as to like how they did it. And back in the day, it was in-person interviews still. I
Oh.
was interviewed in a room with a locally engaged staff and a decision maker, and I think it was a matter of training as well. But it was a very fascinating glimpse into it as a layperson at the time. So if we can go back to the intro part of this video, you asked me how is it that I got into this. This is partly
Yeah.
why because
Interesting.
not that I
Yeah,
got a
personal
chip off my
experience.
shoulder, but
Mhm.
it really gave me a big interest in immigration.
And I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with people that that's what truly got them into it is because of a personal experience interacting with this lovely system.
Yeah, so this table is very useful because it does give you a glimpse as to the common reasons for refusals. But I think moving on to the next slide, there are implications that I'd like to talk about. And I identified three items essentially from the perspective of an applicant. The first one is how do I prepare my application knowing the common refusal grounds? Um, so we already know that it's about the purpose. So I can't state this enough, Mark, and I'm pretty sure you do this for your clients as well. Your study plan. Your study plan is your golden ticket. It needs to be perfect. I mean, really, realistically, it's
Yeah.
very hard. It's a very subjective piece of document, but you really need to capture the attention of the officer in the first 8 seconds. And as a sidebar, not sure if you know this. Turns out that the human attention span has reduced further since 2012
That's
from
so
12
surprising.
seconds down to 8.
8. So what
Yes.
you're saying is the background on our video here with the little moving orbs, maybe that's not so good for maintaining attention of the people watching this video?
Oh, I'm pretty sure you're doing a great job in getting, if anything, I can do this and just like get everyone's attention back centered into us. But in all
Awesome.
seriousness, though, like what you would like to do in your study plan really is to make sure that literally the first 8 seconds that an officer is reading that document, that they understand your theory of the case, your thesis statement has to be upfront in legal writing, Mark, not to relive our law school days, but
Yeah.
they teach us this thing called point first writing.
Writing.
So you want to get your point across across the medium of communication right away.
Yep.
And if you fail in doing that, then the officer is going to doze off. And think of it from their perspective. They're processing hundreds of applications each day. And if you're doing that repetitively for 8 hours, of course you're gonna,
Oh,
lose
yeah.
your attention and your
Yep.
everything looks like it's the same, right? So you
Yep.
really need to be able to summarize your application right there. And as a quick tidbit of a tip, um, we already know those common reasons. Use those as guideposts to say
Yep.
why you're not
Not those.
a problem in terms of like assets, for example, or family ties, for example. Um, I like to put things in a table, for example, or in bullet points, just because from a visual standpoint, they're easier to understand.
Yep.
Um, Now, I think Will has already tweeted about this. IRCC does use another tool. Can't remember the name of it for the
Mhm.
life of me, but it's almost like OCR that harvests information from your applications and puts it into GCMS or whatever tool that they have. So you want to make sure that whatever you're submitting to immigration as well is a clear copy,
Yeah.
because if it's not, it's probably not going to be lifted and put into their tools to process. And I guess before I move on, what are your other tips in terms of like preparing a study plan, Mark?
Yeah. Well, it goes without saying that, like I said, if you're stating anything in your application, you better be prepared to prove it. And it's
Mm,
always a challenge right now because when we know that the officers have so little time to look at applications, it's important to understand that sometimes you almost have to prepare your application as if you're going to have to go to federal court. So when we look at these refusal ratings, where even in the best of circumstances, some of the top schools, they're 30, 40% or lower. You have to understand that there is, I don't think there's any little ATIP we're ever going to get that says we're only going to allow so many study permits through India for this year and
mm,
so many study permits through this visa office. We're not going to find that. But I'm sorry, I'm just not. I don't believe that something like that doesn't exist. Where there are
mm,
some internal controls that they're not targets, which in the old days there used to be targets. So these guidelines that they have play a role, and if they're looking for
mm,
reasons to refuse, sometimes those refusals are just not correct in law. So when we're submitting any
mm,
of these applications, we make sure that we really are preparing it to be challenged, in court. And we're setting it
mhm,
up to remove the discretion of an officer, down to virtually nothing. So if there is a refusal, wow, like they're going to have to really, really stretch it and we're going to be able to challenge it. And in the world of, increasingly prevalent leave applications, the Department of Justice lawyers are getting overrun. And, so that's one thing, I guess, Lou, when we go through and we provide, we put these packages together, they're probably three times what they used to be. And
mm.
all because of this. And ironically, if I feel like I have to put three times as much information in, and the visa officers are telling you we only want a one-page statement of purpose, well, it's really tough. So I think I heard in one of you guys' videos that you actually created like the crib notes version. I can't remember if it was Will or you, like the summary, and then the more fulsome application. And is that what you're referring to,
It
where
was,
you kind of have
yeah.
that?
We'll,
This is like
we'll
for the officer, quick reference. This is all the things you need to know, and then here's the supporting stuff. And you mentioned point
That's right.
first writing. I remember reading an article from Chief Justice Alaskan. It was an old Chief Justice, and it was called "Forget the Windup and Make the Pitch." And it's like a
Mhm.
baseball reference, which is the same. So don't build up, build up, build up to what you want to say. Just say it and then support it with whatever you can, right? And that's how you approach it. So just throwing it in this standard statement of purpose that a representative is used for the 1,500 other study permits that they've assisted with is not effective anymore. It really has to be a tailored approach that, yes, you're hitting on each of those levels, but it has to relate directly to the individual. And you can't just throw out generalities that, I love this
Absolutely.
school. It's so wonderful. The campus is phenomenal and it's really popular. And, who cares, right? It's like this school is going to help me because it relates to my previous history and my interests and it's in line with where I want to go. And like I said, I can't emphasize enough, it's going to help me get this job back home. And it's going to set me up and make me more competitive to advance my career at home, not in Canada.
Absolutely. Again, it's an art when it comes to this, as opposed to express entry, where you hit the factors and you're done, you get the points. So it is a little bit more frustrating. I mean, at a certain level, pre Chinook, let's just say, like before us knowing about Chinook and all these tools, there was a certain assumption that we want to be very concise in our submissions to begin with, and that really the purpose of council subs is to prepare for the eventuality, the possibility that you get refused, so you can go to
Mhm.
federal court and have legs to stand on. But now that we know these things as representatives, I think it's incumbent on us to actually make that advocacy even more stronger. That style of advocacy. I like your reference to a representative who's done this 1,500 times, but in truth, a lot of those lessons may not necessarily be applicable to how things are run as we know it right now.
No.
And let me emphasize that because we're about a year and a half behind with what Chinook is actually currently. Uh, we don't know enough. So we need to be very, very much attuned to what's going on when IRCC communicates certain things. And we need to be attuned to how the federal court treats refusals.
It's very, very interesting to contemplate how things have changed over the years, even from when I started practice. And like I said, the everything has kind of evolved and grown. And I feel like I'm in much of much more of a heated battle, getting applications approved than I ever did before. And I'll let you in on another little thing, Lou. I think if I knew what the world would look like right now, when it comes to being an immigration lawyer, practicing immigration law, I probably would have stayed at Gowlings and maybe done tax law or M&A stuff. I'll be honest. At the time I thought, oh my goodness, this is so dry. I don't want anything to do with it. I love the human interaction. I love being, alongside helping someone, immigrate to Canada where they're so appreciative of what I'm doing for them. And it's a win-win. And the officers are not opposing counsel. They're people that I worked with. And I could fix everything, Lou. I could fix everything. There was always someone that I could call. And then it started to change. And really, it would probably like 2011 is when it started to change. And then the smaller visa offices started to close across the country here in Canada. And slowly the ability to have walk-up services closed off. And that human interaction that you have with officers has disappeared. And it's now on steroids now with Chinook, where everybody is not just a number, like they're like a character, a letter. It's just, yeah, it's crazy.
They're an Excel sheet, bro. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
I, I totally feel you, and yeah, it can be frustrating, and totally understand where people are just exasperated with it. You're not the first immigration lawyer to tell me these sentiments, and unfortunately, I think we're going to see more of the implementation of tools that removes the human element to it. Uh, but we'll see. Hopefully, IRCC's listening to the criticisms that it's unfortunately received, but maybe deservingly, quite
Yep.
frankly, in the last few months when it comes to the implementation of tools. And let me be very clear about this. I don't think there's absolutely anything wrong that they are
Mhm.
afforded tools, especially
Yes.
technological tools,
Yep.
when processing application. The problem is the way that it's communicated and the way
Yep.
that it's presented and the way that it's contemplated and executed. Maybe they can slowly do this, and they need to do this right. I think it's very important that Canada gets this right. We all understand, I think everyone in Canada is in agreement that immigration plays such an important role in our society. And to get this wrong is something that this country cannot afford.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I
So
agree.
let's. I'm gonna get off the pulpit for a second and then
No, it's
switch
all
on
good.
to the other point about DLI. So when
Yeah.
you're preparing your applications for study permits, I think one of the other things that you need to see is if your DLI actually offers supports to you. Some of them I know, for example, when you're preparing your study permit application, offers webinars, seminars, essentially information packages
Mhm.
on what to do and what not to do, for example,
Yeah.
in study permits.
Yeah.
Contact your international student center because they have people who go through the motions of study permit application cycles every session. It's very important to get their perspective, especially if you're not the let's say again the typical 20 something fresh off of high school going into post secondary
Yes.
education. It's
Yeah.
very important that you plug those holes, that you address those issues before they even become issues.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I agree. And if you are going, and here's another thing I'll point out too, and this is where I will be critical of some schools. There's nothing
Mm.
that frustrates me more than schools who rely heavily on foreign students but don't provide those supports. Schools that are happy to take the tuition money, but when the
Mhm.
kids are trying to apply, and this is where a more reputable university here in Saskatchewan, we'll narrow it down here. Um, we're more than happy to take the initial application money for someone that we had interactions with, and even start their school before they receive their study permit, which many have. And then after the study permit was refused, which we believe was on erroneous grounds,
Mhm.
they then did not let the person withdraw or give them the money back for that semester. And that kind of stuff. I'm support. When you talk about supports from DLIs, oh my goodness, like that school's
Yeah.
in my mind just like crash. Like it's one
Right.
thing to benefit from the three times the tuition that the international students pay, but my goodness, you can't just wash your hands of it. You have to take some responsibility of
Mhm.
helping these students. So that's my little soapbox, and I'll step down off of it now.
No, 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 that's good actually. And in relation to that, Will actually made a point when he testified at the House Committee on uh, Citizenship and Immigration that
Mm-hmm.
perhaps the government could look into reallocating a portion of funds that are provided to education agents, essentially money that's being exported out of Canada, um, to actually provide social supports and
Yeah,
maybe legal aid supports to international students who run into trouble.
problems.
Let's be honest here, non-compliance with the study permit really can deal a devastating blow on an international student's eligibility to apply for a PGWP. This is kind of like a common issue that I
Yeah.
run across now. And what I can say is that not all DLIs are created equally. There are
No,
some DLIs there who are amazing, who will throw
phenomenal.
every support that they can.
Yep.
Yeah. But then
And
there are
both
those who just
private
don't.
and both private and public. So that
Agreed.
just some private colleges are just absolutely phenomenal, and some are not. There are some
Hmm.
public universities and colleges that are phenomenal, great supports, and there are some that are not, and
Hmm.
that's just a reality.
I mean, if DLIs are willing to have that conversation, I'm pretty sure my friend Will, even my friend Zainab, and even
Yeah,
you, Mark, would have
yeah,
some ideas on
absolutely.
how these things can be done. At the very least, like information is critical. There's a lot of questions floating around. There's a lot of bad information floating around on the internet, and when people start making wrong assumptions,
Yeah,
it could deal a devastating blow on a person's, an international student's immigration chances. And it all
yeah,
flows from that one small mistake.
yeah,
Um, so I'd like to shift gears here, if you'd permit,
yeah,
Mark.
yeah,
I want to talk about gross numbers in terms of like study permits. So what we've seen in the course of advocacy in the last 2 years during the pandemic, actually even before that, was that uh, there's a constant and a steady growth in international students coming to Canada.
yeah,
It's become a very important export product for the country. Um, Studies have shown that it contributes over $20 billion into the Canadian economy
yeah. That's
annually.
B.
And I
That's
think
B.
that's right, not million. We're talking about billions here.
Yeah,
Um, and we're also, I think we surpassed Australia as the number one destination for international students. I think this was in 2020 or 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah,
In any event, um, what we're looking at right now is that study permits are being approved, or we're taking in a lot of international students, anywhere between 500 to 800,000 every year. But then I'd like to contrast that to the levels plan,
mm-hmm.
which interestingly enough was just revealed last month by Minister
Yeah,
Fraser. They bumped the numbers up, but from your end,
yeah,
Mark, where you're talking about express entry and all these
yeah.
various economic programs,
Mhm.
what's your sense of it, and how does that square with international student intake in Canada?
Yeah. So the big question that is asked, to what extent do international students who come and study in Canada actually want to remain permanent residents? I think the answer to that question is there's a massive chasm between what IRCC thinks and what an education agent thinks or an international school thinks, and even an applicant, what they think. And anecdotally, I think you and I feel that, to a large extent, the vast majority of international students who come to Canada do want a pathway to permanent residence or have one available. And the math just doesn't equate. When we look at the high skill group, um, you know, this year that's been reduced down to what, a little over 40,000. The TR to PR pathway with students that are already here, or essential workers, you've got what, another 40,000. So basically they just pulled it away. CECs have stalled out because of backlogs. And then we look at 2023, they're supposed to increase those levels back up, but only to 80,000. Now, in fairness, there's probably another 80,000 with the PNPs, and there's other programs on the economic side, but there isn't 500,000. The levels plans are a little over 400. So not all are going through. And it may be that there are, artificial or intentional barriers being put in place to close the door on students and to require them to return home, even though their desire is to become a permanent resident. And I'll be honest, right now, I have no logical explanation for why Minister Fraser has not reopened another 18 months for the postgrad students that are expiring. Their permits are expiring. I don't understand why, unless they realize that we can't save them all. And the reality is, it just is what it is. And someone is going to have to suffer. We can't please everyone. We can't keep doing this over and over. We have to draw a line and say, well, you know what? It just doesn't work out. And yes, you've paid $120,000, $30,000 for your education in Canada. Thank you very much. But there isn't a pathway to permanent residence for you, even though probably your school and your education agent told you there would be. And your family has mortgaged your home and, back in your home country to pay the fees. And and so I guess as Roy Rogers, an old reference to a cowboy, would say, happy, he'd be singing happy trails to you. And that's the mentality that we're seeing. And so pathways, permanent residence, there isn't room for everyone, despite how much they want to apply. And it's becoming just as competitive to get those PR spots now as it was to get here in the first place on a study permit. So that's my thought.
I actually spoke. Right, I spoke to a journalist earlier today, in fact, and they just got data from immigration, and they were saying that uh, apparently there's been an increase in an uptick in temporary residence applications, specifically study permits. And what's interesting is that despite the fact that the federal skilled workers pathway is a closed program for all intents and purposes for this year, um, well, we're still seeing the demand for Canada is there, and
It's still
it's
there.
manifesting across different lines of businesses, including the study permit route.
Yep.
And it's troubling because of everything that you just said. But in addition to that, because traditionally, um, and again, it goes back to the reason why I showed that India was the top source country for all those colleges, and India being 30 makes up 35% of express entry applications being approved. um it talks about the CRS arms race.
Yeah.
um Even if it's not a thing that's ongoing, express entry draws, we're still seeing CRS arms race, right, Mark? Like
Yep.
people are still working on making
Yep.
sure that they're fine tuning their scores.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like we said, uh, being able, the French language ability is the new job offer.
Hmm.
And so
Ah.
individuals that are able to have taken this time and said, you know what, they're not doing draws. Like, I don't know how anyone would have predicted that it would have been, since December 23rd of 2020, since we last had a no
Hmm.
program specified draw. But those people who said, well, I might as well start learning French, and have been studying intensely for the last year and a half or whatever it might be, they're, as far as that arms race, they're doing the one thing that can substantially increase human capital without having to rely on some other third party or entity. This is something inherently on themselves that they can do. So that's the world that we're in. Yeah.
Hmm. And it also puts into spotlight the regional programs and the PNPs.
Hmm.
I remember when you talked about the Draw 174, if I'm
Yeah.
176, was it?
176. Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
176, when
Yeah.
we had that 74 cutoff,
Yeah.
um, it tanked a lot of PNPs, right?
Yeah.
Now we're
Yeah.
seeing the exact opposite.
Yeah. They're riding high on the hog now. They've got tons of applicants. There's no shortage of people to nominate. Some provinces that rely heavily on local, you know, temporary foreign worker flips are, even they have more candidates that they can imagine. And the interesting part about
Hmm.
the rural and northern immigration pilots, which I have to assume it's going to drop that pilot, fairly soon. You take communities like Claresholm, Alberta, which is, 60 kilometers from here, whatever, up the road, small community of maybe 3 or 4 thousand people. Well, what's one of the side effects of being one of those cities? It's that you have post-grad students from Calgary and Edmonton and other places moving to Claresholm to take jobs in the hopes that they'll get one of those spots because they don't have another pathway through CEC. And, these
Hmm.
communities are seeing an influx of foreign workers into them just for the mere fact that they have 25 spots for the rural and northern immigration pilot. So this is what we're seeing. Very, very interesting.
That's fascinating. And it's also very distressing, I can only imagine, for those who are here, because it's a mad scramble. And one thing that folks make an assumption about when they talk to immigration lawyers or consultants is they know every single possible program that there is.
Yep.
I think it was someone in the listserv who pointed out that not even the government of Canada has a page where it lists down all of the
Everything.
existing programs in Canada for immigration. And I was
It's
talking to an immigration lawyer in the US, and he was wondering about this plethora of options. Um, it's a very uniquely Canadian. At the same time, it also creates very uniquely Canadian problems
yeah.
from the perspective of practicing
Yeah.
immigration law.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Lou, our time is quickly coming to an end here, but
Mhm.
I don't know if you had any, at least at this stage, if you have, we've got a few more slides to kind of work through, but we've talked a little bit about Chinook already at this stage,
Mhm.
but I don't know if there's
Right.
anything more that you want to address within the context of our slides.
Right.
We've kind of
Well,
addressed for the most part. I
sure.
guess one thing I will point out that, uh, that I am writing a book with another lawyer that it's going to be published by Emens on the PR programs, the economic PR programs. And
Nice.
as we've started creating the table of contents for that, Lou, we don't know what to do with the PNPs. We know that there's a book out there, a resource that, that is a serial that kind of is updated, but we just don't know what to do with the PNPs and even these programs themselves. Because at the end of the day, I think the reason no one has written a book on it is because they change so frequently. And,
That's right.
by the time you get it to print, then Alberta changes its name from the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program to the Alberta Opportunity Immigrant Program. And so,
Mhm.
all of
Mhm.
these changes, it's a constant state of flux, and it makes it really difficult for you and I to advise our clients who say, look, I'm thinking about studying in Canada and I may pursue permanent residence. What pathways do I have? And you and I are
Mhm.
left with the reality that, well, um, this is the way it is as of today, but everything could change tomorrow. And so people are banking, thousands of dollars on a plan that they just are not sure if the end result is actually going to be there available for them.
So, I would say two things about that, and I think I already made reference to it at the beginning. I like the big picture. I like big data. Big data won't give you a specific answer,
Mhm.
but it will give you a sense of where things are going.
Mhm.
Look at the general economic conditions of Canada. When you're applying for study permits, is it your true intention to actually just study, or do you have plans to study and potentially open up opportunities for, permanent residencies? One thing I would say on that point specifically, is that We're no longer in the, 2011s when, it was practically handed to you on a silver platter.
Yes.
Not necessarily true,
Yeah,
but
but it was a whole lot
relatively
easier.
speaking to what it is. Absolutely. So it is very important that you know what you're getting yourselves into. Don't get, you know, oversold by agents who are basically marketing Canada on the behalf of the government of Canada to come to Canada so that you can spend your tuition money on the hopes of getting permanent residence right off the bat. That's not a thing that happens anymore. And then, on top of that, even on the front end of study permits, you spend a lot of money to actually just get to that. And at that point, you may still get a refusal, even if you have the best application that you can come out with. And at that point, you really want to look at your options. You really want to get the right information. And I guess I'm going to wear my sales cap here and do a
Yeah.
little bit of marketing, Mark, with your
Yeah,
permission.
absolutely.
This is where people like Mark come into the picture, people like Will, and us as well. In terms of like providing that advice, that legal information that you will need in order to, make sure that you have a plan, even if you know that things are constantly changing and shifting around. Uh, and one final point with respect to statistics, you know, keep in mind that these things do not determine an outcome for yourself. At the end of the day, it will be your own application that determines that outcome. And if you're somehow the victim of a processing quirk, as we are slowly discovering now, uh, that's the importance of having immigration counsel by your side,
Yeah.
because there are tools, there are recourses that you can take if you truly want to go this way.
That's really, really good advice. And that's a nice segue into alternative forms of assistance that you can receive. And we talked a little bit about
Oh,
this at the
yes.
beginning, but I'm just going to ship over here to the website, and you can see Lou is he has a DOI boot camp for study permits. That's a class that's held via Zoom that's designed to kind of help you execute your own study permit pathway to Canada. And so definitely go head over there. There'll be some links in the descriptions. If it's not there, you can go to the YouTube video here on the Canadian Immigration Institute and also have access to that. I also want to remind everyone, if you haven't gone over to Lou's and Will Tao's their podcast, which is, as much as anything right now, it's a video component to it up on the YouTube channel. In light of all circumstances, definitely head over there and subscribe, because, and let's see here if any since we've got you on here. Oh, you got 4 new subscribers. That's great. You guys need to get over there and subscribe to this, because there is really an unbelievable amount of content. It's not just high level stuff like we're talking here. There's a lot of really, really essential tips and strategies for all kinds of things. And yes, there's a heavy focus on helping international students and just tracking what's happening with Chinook and these other tools immigration is using to process applications. And I've told people repeatedly, Lou, that it's the most important question that anyone can ask when they're filling out an application form is why. Why are they asking this question? And so many people just don't think about it, don't turn their minds to it, because what we teach in our courses, and I know Lou, you'll teach in yours, is the why. And if we know why, then we know what to put in that particular box. And when we're fighting for characters, and often people just don't understand. And as a former immigration, working as an immigration officer, officers see things through a different paradigm than an applicant. And if you are not understanding how they're looking at it, sometimes answers you think are perfectly correct and accurate can result in refusal. And even words you use, right, that are flagged within
Mhm.
Chinook, that are pulled up and loops you into a tier that you never should have been in, just because of how you describe something, which may or may not have been an adequate reflection of the realities. So thank you so much, Lou. And I just realized that as we're recording, this is the one challenge with lives. We went a little bit longer than anticipated, and so I'm a little bit late for one of my follow-up consultations, and that's okay. It's my banker, so that's not a problem. But I know there's a lot of people that were asking questions here that we didn't get to. Those of you who are asking questions that were outside of the context of our topic today, which is study permits and approval ratings by designated learning institution. The contact information for both Lou and myself will be in the description. And remember, every Wednesday and Thursday, I go live Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. live Q&As, and Alicia joins me on Thursdays. We were at it this morning at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. You can come back and get your questions answered. But yeah, head on over to Lou's all the different contacts and information that we've shared, and we'll make sure that it's put into the description. So, any parting words, Lou?
Uh, Not really, but good luck in your study permit applications. And if you have any questions, we're happy to assist, book a consultation. If you want to have a look at the data, there's an inquiry form, as Mark pointed out, and just reach out and let's see what we can do.
You bet. And there is the questions, free assessment, and the consult, which is all on the LJD Law website. All right. Thanks so much. Take care, and we'll see you later.